Hi everyone. So, the topic today is one that I was definitely going to run into sooner or later. Um, it always comes up. I should have expected it, so here we are. The topic is PEDs, performance enhancing drugs, or more specifically in this case, steroids. So, I had a couple user questions, and they go like this. One of them is it possible to reach the lean, muscle-ripped look without steroids or growth hormone? And is it possible to go through one safe cycle if you use the right steroids and only once? Alright, so standard disclaimer, I've never used a steroid. I'm not an expert on steroids. I don't really recommend steroids for, 99% of the population. So take this all with a grain of salt. So the question is it possible to get super lean, super jacked without steroids? Yes, it absolutely is, particularly if you have really good genetics. So the thing is that steroids they make a huge difference when it comes to building muscle, not so much of one when it comes to building strength. But the thing is, they don't necessarily change the playing field too much. They just sort of push the level up a little bit higher. So if you take a bell curve of people, and you've got people with really crappy genetics on this end, and people with really awesome genetics and amazing genetics on this end, and you've got a bell curve, and most people fall somewhere in the middle right there. Most people are going to be somewhere right here. They can build some muscle, they could get lean, but they're not going to be high responders or anything like that. On the low end, you're going to have people that train and train and train and don't get anywhere at all. On the high end, you're going to have people who train and just suddenly get jacked, and it's crazy. And so what happens is steroids don't change that bell curve. If we were to take everyone in that population of that bell curve and we were to give all of them steroids, it's going to move slightly to the right. That's all it's going to do. And so what that means is that people will be able to get more jacked. People will be able to do better than they could without them. But there's still going to be people with good genetics who are better than the rest, and there's still going to be people with poor genetics who are worse than the rest. Steroids don't really change that bell curve. They just push it over. So the question is it possible to get super jacked without steroids? Yes. Particularly at lower weights. Most people genetically, naturally, you can plug these into various calculators on the internet. Based on some of the measurements of your body, you can go to thestrengththeory.com. If you search what is my maximum muscular potential, and it's partly based on a guy, Casey Butts, who has his own calculators on his website. Basically, there's some really good science behind this. What happens is you can kind of predict how much muscle you can build while maintaining a certain level of leanness using these calculators based on your body measurements, because a lot of how much muscle you can build is actually based on your frame size and based on your joints and some other factors. And so there's actually a sort of a limit at which a person can naturally be super jacked. And if they go heavier than that limit, what happens is that they're going to be able to keep gaining weight and muscle, but they're going to gain more and more fat and less muscle. So their body composition is going to worsen and worsen. They're going to look not as good. And for most people, on average, that's not too high. That's maybe 200 pounds, 210, 220, 230. Maybe less than that, maybe more. But that's kind of, a range that a lot of people fall into. Now, the thing is, you see these bodybuilders out there nowadays that are, they start off at 300 pounds in the off season, and then they cut down to like 270 or 260, 250, whatever. They're much bigger than they used to be, and that's because of steroids. They can build a lot more muscle than people used to be able to in the olden days because of steroids, because of growth hormone. So yes, you can absolutely get more jacked and more easily by taking steroids. Does that mean you can't do it if you don't? No, you just might be limited to more what your actual genetics kind of dictate. So you might be limited to basically, not as heavy as you could have gotten, not as much muscle as you could have built. You can still be jacked, but you'd be jacked and smaller than if you were jacked and, taking a bunch of drugs. So the other part of the question is it safe to do, just one cycle and, come off of it? Well, that's kind of a loaded question. That assumes that you would know as a beginner what a safe cycle is, and you'd be able to do it effectively. And most people probably, honestly, wouldn't. There's so much, you can dip into these, steroid-heavy forums every now and then, and they exist out there on the internet. They're not non-existent. But there's a lot of conflicting information. There's a lot of, there's not really very good. There is science. It's just there's not good standardization because a lot of people are just, try this, try this, try this, try this, try this, and do I think that the health risks of steroids are often overblown? Absolutely. Do I think that it's absolutely possible to, do a safe cycle, here or there? Yeah, probably. There are plenty of people who have admitted to doing really crazy amounts of drugs over the years, or, performance-enhancing drugs, and, and been somewhat okay, or when their health starts to go bad, they stop using it altogether, and then they, manage to get out somewhat okay. There's also plenty of people that have heart attacks at, really young ages. So, again, I don't recommend them for most people. Could you get away with it? Probably, yeah. And the thing, too, is that steroids have literally a lifetime impact. So what happens is the muscle and the satellite cells that you build as a result of training and being on those drugs stick with you. They don't just you'll lose some of it because your hormone levels will go down, back to natural levels or whatever. But you don't necessarily lose all of what you gained. You still keep some of that, and so that could be an advantage for the rest of your life. You could you could have basically steroids are this high curve, and this is like a low curve, and then steroids, and then going off of it is a curve somewhere in the middle. So yeah, that can actually have positive impacts for the rest of your life. Does that still mean, again, do I recommend it? Probably not. It's the kind of thing that I mean, if you were super serious about competing in some kind of sport, maybe. And here's the thing, at high levels of sport, it's, we don't really have exact numbers. We can't know exactly who's using and who isn't. There's not really a good way to test unless someone has failed a drug test. And it's actually surprisingly easy, as I understand it, to not fail drug tests. So it's relatively easy to get around it and still, be taking things. That Lance Armstrong, he never failed a drug test in his life. It wasn't, he got turned in by one of his teammates years later. These things, people know how to get around them. But there was a really interesting study I read a while back, and basically what they did was they were taking changes in the steroid market, and they were comparing that to performances, and I can't remember exactly what kind of elite athlete it was. I believe it was Olympic sprinters or Olympic jumpers or something like that. And so basically what they did was they put a graph of, the times at the Olympic Games and the qualifiers and everything every year, and they compared that to a graph of essentially this, important events on the steroid market. So whenever a new, important product came out, whenever a new test came out that made it, harder, whenever, something became out of, you couldn't get it anymore, or it became more expensive, whatever. And what they found was that changes in the steroid market, had correlated very strongly with changes in performance time. So basically when a new steroid came out and it was undetectable, or, steroids became more available or whatever, people's performance would go up in the subsequent years. And then whenever there was, anything that made it, harder to use them, or the tests got better or whatever, people's performance would go down a little bit. Is that proof that everyone is using? No, it's not. But what it does mean is that there's probably a significant number, at least half or so, of people that are using. And and I've heard all kinds of, it's different for different sports, of course. Bodybuilding, it's pretty much known that everyone in bodybuilding is using it at a high level. But when it comes to a lot of other sports, chances are it's probably between 50 and 75%. But again, you can't really make anything near an exact guess on these. And that tells us two things. One, you have to realize that a lot more people are using it than you probably think, and they're just quiet about it because it's illegal and they can't talk about it and they can't risk sponsorships or whatever. This is their livelihood. Their livelihood depends on them using steroids and not telling anyone about it. That's how it works. The other thing is that means that there are some people that are so ungodly beastly that they are not using steroids and they're going head to head with the people that are. And that's the thing, is genetics is crazy. There's a huge amount of genetic variation that accounts for different levels of performance. There are extreme outliers who are so freaking good that they probably don't even need PEDs. And that's fine with them. There's nothing wrong with that. But yeah, steroids are, again, not something I would recommend. Could you get away with it, in terms of your own health? Yeah, probably. But again, it's a whole can of worms that you don't want to get into. It's just like, it's it's a lot, and they always come up, and when they do come up, people are always quick to point fingers and insult the other side and stuff like that, and natties are always like, oh, that guy's not natty, like natty or not videos of the scum of the earth, like those videos where people are like, is this guy natty? Is this guy natty? I think this guy's using it. This guy's definitely, like, that's 100% horseshit. It's pure speculation. It doesn't mean jack shit. You don't know. You don't know. That doesn't mean that there aren't probably that most of the people out there probably aren't using. They probably are. But it's pointless to speculate on it. It doesn't mean anything. Like who cares? And and even if they're if they are, who cares? Whatever, some people are willing to go to that length to squeeze, whatever they can out of their bodies, and, if that's worth it to you, then, awesome, do that. But, for a greater number of people, I'd say it's probably not worth it. You've got a life to live, you've got other shit to do. I wouldn't, sacrifice your long-term health, for this, unless, again, you were already some kind of extremely high level competitor, extremely gifted in, something. Anyway, so that is my opinion on that. It was going to come up sooner or later. I had to talk about it, so here we are. As always, like, comment, share, tell me what you want to see next time, and good night, everybody.